Out her ordeal. Now, it has been 70 years since 2 centuries of British colonial rule in India was brought to an end. With it came the Partition, where communities that had coexisted for centuries succumbed to sectarian violence. The country was split in two, forming Hindu-majority India and Muslim-majority Pakistan. It was the largest mass migration ever recorded, with 12 million people on the move across the newly formed borders. Muslims journeyed to west and east that now formed Pakistan, while Hindus and Sikhs headed in the opposite direction. It led to hundreds of thousands being abducted or killed. Well, we can talk to Vinod Chhabra, who fled what is now Pakistan for India when he was 9 years old. His cousin Ajay Chhabra and his son Diren, who is 10, are also here. Ajay says Partition has lived with the family for decades. We're also joined by Gurinder Chadha, who directed films Bend It Like Beckham and this year's Viceroy's House, amongst others. Joins us from the Wagah border, which separates India and Pakistan, and has played host to events marking the 70th anniversary. And we're joined from Leicester by Professor Gurupal Singh, who has specialised in the history of partition. Thank you all very much for joining us. It's great to have 3 generations of your family here to talk, obviously, about what you went through, firstly, Vinod, and how it's trickled down. Tell us, you were 9 when partition happened.
Yes.
What happened with your family?
Thank you. It simply is, first I'd like to just say Happy Independence Day to all of those people, those who are watching this program, because it's the 70th, the year. And luckily it is 50 years today. It is the 15th of August. I landed here in England on the 15th, and that was one of those days when my uncle brought me from the Heathrow airport, and from onwards I had been here and in Germany and all around Europe and had been working here. But these are the memories that I'll have to go back almost about, a long back, 60 years. And that is in my childhood that obviously that I have to go back, And those are the memories which I personally think still haunting sometime when I think about it. But it is simply...
So what do you remember then of that time?
I certainly will just, precisely I'll tell you, because I think I would have been 8, 9 or something around that, I was not in school that time. It was because of the disturbed areas all around. And actually we were there in the school, but we are not regularly going. But unfortunately that was, when we came to know, we were in Silamali. Silamali is just away from Sargodha. Sargodha is one of the major cities now in Pakistan.
And sorry to interrupt, I mean, literally in an instant, your life changed from the ordered life that you had known up until that point as a little boy, and then suddenly it was gone. How did you cope with that as a little boy?
It changed to some extent that I would say that at that time I didn't understand.
Yeah.
But now when I grew up, and also I said, that happened with us, all of the family. And that's where, when we were in Silamali, we were one day told that, okay, go. We were in we had a factory, cotton factory, and we were living there by my father, my mother, and brothers and all that. And we were asked to leave that place immediately.
So you lost everything overnight?
Everything that we were not sure that we would be living or we wouldn't be, because at the age, what I'm talking about, that we did not know that what will happen tomorrow, because we were shifted from that area, from that mill, or you could say factory, to a place that there were this military there with the rifles, with everything and all that. They were said, don't go up, don't show your faces. And that's where it was so scary. We were so small, and we were not knowing what is happening all around.
You've got Diren next to you, who's about the same age that you were then.
He is just like my grandson. And obviously I would have been almost like him.
What do you think, Diren, when you hear Vinod talking about what he went through at the age that you are?
I think that must have been a dreadful, horrible time for him, because since he's my grandfather, I know how it feels and I know him. So when he left his home, he left everything, his possessions, and he only took his things he really needed. So, for example, like some bedding, a pillow, and just some clothes, and that's all you would need. You wouldn't need your bed frame, you wouldn't need your fridge. You would just move and then rush out, and you'd turn on the radio in the morning while you're eating your breakfast, and then you hear it all of a sudden, get out of India.
You know,
Across the
obviously know a lot about it. Is it because as a family you talk openly
Yeah.
about it? Have you always talked openly about it?
Yeah, well, my dad first told me when I was about 8 or 9, and I'm 10 now, so I've known quite a lot about it. And I went online and I looked at it, and I thought how some people have granddads still living now. Yeah.
Gurinder, I know that you've made a documentary for the BBC about this. You're obviously a very well-known filmmaker. These are stories that have passed through the generations, but I guess it's fair to say that widely it's not been something it's not on curriculums as a matter in a commonplace way. How do you see partition?
You're absolutely right. The British Empire is rarely taught now in schools, and I think the real question is, yes, there were terrible things that happened during partition, but what my research in my film Viceroy's House looks at is the real reason why partition happened. And I don't think enough people are focusing on the fact that it was British policy at that time to have the divide, to make partition happen. And people like the family of the guests in the studio and my own family, their sort of lives and concerns didn't really matter at the time when this policy to divide India was being planned by the British way before 1947.
What was your family's situation?
Well, my family was, my grandmother was in Jhelum, which is now Pakistan, and she was there with her 5 young children. And very similar, you know, one day an Indian truck said, there's too much violence here, you have to leave. So she was put on the truck with her children, and then on a train, and for 3 days they had no food and water and couldn't get off the train either because there was cholera everywhere. And eventually her milk dried up and her youngest child starved to death. And then they ended up in a refugee camp for months on end. So it's a personal tragedy for my family, as it is for many people. But really, I want people to ask questions now of why it happened. And I think, you know, people are too busy focusing on the trauma of partition and not actually asking the question of why it happened. Because it's a lot to do with the geopolitics of the time, you know, between Britain and America, much like we see happening in the world today, where suffering is happening with refugees.
Professor Gurapal Singh, how do you explain how it happened?
Well, that is a difficult question, but I think I would differ from Gurinder Chhabra in that I don't think you can entirely place the blame on British Raj. The situation in India after the Second World War had become quite ungovernable. And from almost a year before the events happened, there was widespread communal rioting. And even in March 1947, many months before the partition actually occurred, Indian politicians and politicians in Punjab were clamoring for the division of the province. So I think, in a sense, there is a shared blame, and it's not something most academic historians take seriously, that it was solely the responsibility of British government and the colonial administration in India, in particular Mountbatten's decision to advance the transfer of power by several months.
Vinod, I was sorry to interrupt you there, but I just want to go back to Vinod, because Vinod, we're talking obviously about, you know, the awful events, but also the fact it was independence, and I was struck by the fact that right at the beginning, your immediate reaction was say Happy Independence Day. It wasn't to
Happy Independence,
reflect on the bad.
It was when independence came. We didn't know that is happy, because we suffered the time that, as the professor is saying also, and one as Gurinder is saying. One thing I tell you, that we went through the trucks, we went through the road, we have seen a train full of the dead bodies which we were not allowed to go there. Actually, our factory was near in Silam Valley. That factory was there. I was not allowed to go to the station, which was almost on the walking distance. And they said, no, 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 you don't want to, you shouldn't go there. You shouldn't, because I could see the blood coming out of those compartments. There, those people were inside. That we didn't know. And we didn't know whom to ask what is happening here. And then we were put into the trucks with my grandmother, grandfather, brother, sister, everybody. We in the trucks, and the trucks which kept on going. And on the way, the people were walking on the road. People were not only walking, they were crying, they were, I mean, feeling there was no water given. It was also, I wouldn't, not really. Believe you me, it was a terrible experience as a child.
We absolutely, I mean,
And that's where I would
the
not
events
see
you're
the
describing
pleasure.
are unimaginable. And Ajay, Diren was saying that you sort of first started talking to him when he was 8 or 9 about it. When you hear this, I mean, it would be very understandable that bitterness would trickle through the generations of a family. How do you see it?
I don't think, I've grown up in a family where bitterness did not exist. And in fact, compassion and the things that hold us together, our cultural values, is the environment in which I grew up in. And when I speak to other colleagues or friends or family who have had similar experiences, I think that metaphor repeats itself again and again. And I think that's the incredible power of that place, of that community. I think our families didn't look back, they looked forward, they had to. I think, as Vinod describes, the brutal images that he lives with. For us, I think, for myself, I think it was important to convey some of that to my son, you know, because these are missing pieces of the jigsaw in all of our family narratives. You know, history repeats itself, and these borders are artificial, you know. And I think it's important that we reflect on all of these corners of history in order for our next generation, I suppose, to understand the world better. So I'm really pleased that, you know, Diren has understood this, but I'm also really pleased that those communities have looked forward and not looked back.
Well, Gorinda, I know that you've been attending events on the border between Pakistan and India. What has the mood been there? What's been happening?
Well, last night at midnight, I attended a candlelit vigil at the border, at the Wagah border, which was very moving. And normally, this event has been happening for 22 years. And normally people come from Pakistan with candles and also from India. But sadly, last night, the Pakistanis weren't allowed permission to come as they normally do. So just the Indians were there. So that was quite sad. But I think one of the things that you'll find here in India, where I am right now in Amritsar, in Punjab, is that there are an awful lot of initiatives between people and cultural groups to keep those ties strong, and particularly through artists, through poets, literature. There are great moves to say that, yes, the land might be divided, but actually our hearts aren't, and our culture isn't.
Thank you very much. That's a good point to end the programme on. Thank you all. Thank you very much for your company today. BBC Newsroom Live coming up next. I'll see you same time tomorrow. Bye-bye.